Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian Farmer at Tribeca Trade Group, and this is your end of day as well as week and month recap for Friday, April 28th. The trading month is now complete for April, and we'll go over some themes to kind of review and where there is leadership in the market. Again, we always go through the actual stats. It's very interesting when you kind of break that down versus what you think was the best performance for the month. So we'll go over that in just a second. First things first, I just have our website up. This is where you can learn more about being a member of the Tribeca Trade Group and some of the services and products that we offer. Check it out, tribecatradegroup.com. Also, go to Substack too. For now, it's free. We do put out a couple notes a week about what the indices are doing, plus our out-of-the-box scan, names that are breaking out of multiple time frame analysis, right? Multiple time frames where we're seeing breakouts, on 3 different time frames. All right, so that's just a quick intro to a little bit about what we do. So yes, before we go over any of the performance for the month, risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. You could read that full risk disclaimer right there ahead of your weekend. Really exciting. So here's how we finished this month. Just to recap the indices. I won't talk too much about today, other than it was a nice way to kind of end the month. A very, very choppy month as well. You could look at the performance on your left to see basically what unfolded for the day, but strong breath for now. Yesterday and today, we'll see if we get that McClellan summation index flip back to the upside. Could be today. If not, we may need some stronger breath in the beginning of next week for that to materialize. Also, just one quick word about this week, right? Tons of names that reported this week. These weeks are always very tricky, in my opinion, because, nobody knows what's going to happen with these names that report earnings and their earnings reactions, right? Nobody has a crystal ball. You can kind of gauge a little bit of what you think is going to happen, but I'll tell you, that's why this market is so interesting, is because people like to make predictions. I don't really like to do that. I was involved in a webinar earlier this week, asking my opinion about what the FANG stocks were going to do for this week. And I think I got most of them wrong. And it's not really my, it's fun to kind of, go through and try to make some predictions, but it's not really my game to be making like predictions. I just don't know what names are going to do on earnings. And, we were going over in this morning, we were talking about Microsoft. Microsoft have had one of the biggest earnings reactions that it's had in multiple quarters, right? And if you don't believe me, all right, and then I will recap the performance in just a second. But Microsoft was up 7.2% for the month. If we scroll down here and take a look at the past quarters, that's a huge reaction. There was one other time when Microsoft went up 6.7%. That was back in July of 2022. There was also one where it missed. But if you go past this, right, and look at the majority of quarters that happened for Microsoft, they were only implying a little over a 4% move, because that's historically what Microsoft moves. I think once you get through those last couple quarters, right, of this negative 7.7 and the 6.6, you really have to go back and go back a few years to basically where there was an outside move, right? So all I'm trying to illustrate here, there's one all the way back in 2016, right, when Microsoft went down 7%, and then you had one where it went up 10% back in 2015. So, very unusual. I think what we got in earnings, and it wasn't all good news. But I did see a stat that was out there that was posted that's saying that, it's that there's a lot of earnings beats based on expectations so far in terms of what we've received from earnings. Again, it's all about the expectations, not so much whether or not like the overall year over year is increasing or decreasing, right? If unless you're making predictions based on those numbers, and that means a lot to you, that's one thing. But if you're a trader, you really care more about, or trader or investor, you really care more about what the expectations are and if they're beating expectations. right? Because that is what is so important. And coming into this quarter for earnings, the expectations were pretty low, so it was an easier bar to jump over for a lot of companies. All right, so that said, right, again, overall, I think the major theme that I wanted to mention is they're very tricky weeks when you've got such a big portion of the overall indices reporting in 1 week. And next week is going to be another big week in terms of earnings, plus Fed meeting on Wednesday. So how did we finish for the month? Well, the S&P finished up 1.6%. The Q's actually underperformed, only up about 0.5%. I think you have to remember, just so that you put things in perspective, that the Qs have been the outperformer year to date. They're up 21.1%. So a little bit of digestion, maybe a false breakdown that we saw this week. If you look at the mid caps and the small caps, they are where the underperformance is. Just barely, the mid caps just barely up 2.7%. And looks like the small caps, this should be in green. I should have changed this over. I apologize. But light performance, just barely up for the year. The ARC Innovation ETF, I thought that this was interesting, right? Just something to that I have in my spreadsheet, just as a proxy for growth at any cost, was down 11% this month, right? Took very big different performance from what the indices did. The IBD 50, which had some strength last week, not so much this week, was down 3.6% for the week. That finished down 2%, and both growth and value very close, but it looks like value actually beat out growth for the month of April. All right. And then when we go over this week's performance, right, just to show you what outperformed, believe it or not, it was, again, I chuckle at some of these things because it's just, to me, a little bit unexpected, but telecom stocks were up 3.4%. That was your market leader. I asked a couple of members what they thought what the best performing sector was for the week. We talked a lot about home builders today in the trading room. They did finish well, and a couple of people picked that up 2.5% for the week. And of course, tech was in there too, up 2%. Consumer staples, also not a bad looking chart overall. That was up for the week. Pot stocks, cryptos also were up decently. And then if you go on the right side here, some pretty big underperformers too. So again, it wasn't, this earnings, as I mentioned, that the majority of companies are beating earnings expectations, but there are still a lot of names that are getting hammered pretty decently. Solar was down 7.4% for the week. That's a big move. Transports were down 2.6%, right? So things like First Solar, ENPH had a bad week. And then when you look at what the transports did, UPS was the big story there, and a couple of the, I think, freight names were down too. Biotech did not have a good week at all, right? Last week was a big week, big M&A week last week, not so much this week, right? Biotech loves M&A. So when it kind of goes quiet for a little bit, it gives back some of those gains. That's kind of what you usually see. But that group loves, M&A activity. And the metals and mining space was down 1.5%. All right, let's go to the performance. Let's bring up my spreadsheet over here for the month, right? And again, here's where the indices looks like spot. And this spreadsheet might be a little bit different than the other spreadsheet for some reason, but that's because I've got the 5-day. Oops, so ignore this up here. Sorry about this. We're going to go down to the sectors because I may have changed the how these things are situated, but it was the builders up 7.8%. So, I don't want to make too much of the argument that that there's only such slim participation. Obviously, the FANG stocks going up this week. The Microsoft, the Google, the who else had a big number. The Amazon did not, but Apple had a big week. As well. For some reason, I'm forgetting a company, but it's the end of the week, and it is what it is. But yes, those names absolutely right. They're going to push the indices around because they are the biggest weights in the index, and that's just how a market cap index works, right? The big names are always going to be responsible for the biggest the largest weights in a market cap weighted index are always going to be responsible for the performance. That's just how a market cap weighted index works. However, that doesn't mean that there's not performance other places. And in fact, like those big mega cap tech was not one of your leaders for this month, right? If you look at XLK, it was actually down for the month, right? Or basically flat, I would say, for the month. All right, so if you look at the names that did well, and we're going to go through some charts in these things, but it was, going back to, even though the home builders did not have a good week, they were still amongst the leaders. So builders and biotech, right? This is a theme that we talked about, I think, in last week's videos. Last week, the recap of I think at Friday's video. If not, if I'm getting the day incorrect, I apologize, because I'm going from memory, but I believe that we discussed both the builders and biotech, and they dominated basically in a very choppy month. The home builders were up 7.8%. Right. And this is tough, right? This market is tough. One of the things, if you turn on financial media, you're being told how bad the housing market is and how bad real estate is, right? Well, the home builders don't think so. They're up 7.8%. I was reading some comments from, we had a whole slew of home builders report. One of them was Beazer Homes, right? This is not a name that I really trade, but had a huge move up today. And if I could find the note from it, but maybe from earlier in the day. Let's see. Oh. Oh, let me see. One second, guys. Again, it's Friday, so you have to bear with me, because it's been a long week, a big week of data. But here's the note from Beazer Homes, ticker symbol BZH. Right, the gap between the structural demand for homes and the likely supply of homes, which has given rise to multi-million home deficit over the past decade, remains in place. Right, this is comments from Beazer Homes management. Commenting on current market conditions, Mr. Merrill said, while the home affordability remains quite challenging, home builders appear to be adjusting to a higher rate environment, aided by both wage growth and moderating home prices. All right, so there you go. So this is BZH. Right, and look at the move that's on a weekly chart today. Stock was up 24% today. Right, so this was not the only name that's doing this. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, right, it was DHI who had good earnings, and notice that they've been kind of holding in here and building. But it's also names. TPH had earnings. Right, this is TriPoint Holdings. I think also MTH had earnings as well. This is Meritage Homes. Right, I believe this also had earnings this week too. Again, it's tough because there's so many names that reported, and of course, only I don't want to say only, but the majority of what is being covered in the financial press is what the big FANG stocks did. And I get it. That's important because they are the biggest names in the indices, and they, like just as said a few minutes ago, they are going to move the indices any way you cut it, because they're the largest names in the index, right? They're the biggest companies. But if you go through one by one, right? I mean, I've been long Toll Brothers for a bit, right? And I actually took profits and re-added in here, and it's moving back up. Pulte Homes, I was making a joke about this earlier. What is this company into? Of course, they're a home builder, but I mean, look at the move. So again, it's not just one company that is doing it, right? Sometimes you see one company report earnings and it gives a boost to the whole group, right? But you're seeing many of them come out and basically say that they're executing very well and that it's a pretty good climate right now. So how does the group look? Again, there's two different home builder ETFs that most people concentrate on. ITB has more home builders in it, even though it's called home construction. But this does not look like it's that extended, guys. And I think 82 is an area that this could gravitate towards, right? What's nice about a sector ETF is that you can diversify. You still get you're still going to get the performance if the group continues to act well, right? If it was just one name, then we'd want to focus on that one name, right? But if it's the whole group, right, and you've got 5 or 6 different builders doing the same thing, right? You could see the holdings, the biggest names is DR Horton, Lennar is in there, NVR, Pulte, right? And then you've got some other names in here too. This Sherman-Williams chart actually is starting to come alive as well, which is not a home builder, but a retailer, right, that caters to builders. But BLDR, unfortunately, this name is going to have earnings next week. But the dip was bought in builder once again. One of the strongest names out there. I mentioned this Sherman-Williams, so I thought I would bring it up, but not extended. It's still a bit of a pricey stock, right? The PE is like a 29, but if you're looking for something that hasn't really moved at all. Maybe I guess you could say that it's moved from the April or the March lows, but it's just barely above the 200-day moving average. All right. So that group, of course, performed very well. I have some exposure to the group. Like I said, I'm long home builder, I'm long Toll Brothers, and I actually just started a position in ITB. I think the way that you want to look at some of these names, right? I think a lot of people, including myself, struggle with buying some of these things that are already up decently. But you take a look at them, 1 week and they're up again, because this is where the leadership is in this market. So you have to get involved in some place. And I don't think it's that extended here, right? It just had some consolidation in this area. So that's a situation. Also, if you want to look at what the other home builder ETF, which has more retail in it than home builders, that doesn't look bad either, which is XHB. So it really depends on what you want. And again, it's always important to look to see what companies are in the ETF versus the name of the ETF. Very important concept, because your performance can be much, much different. All right. And then of course, XBI, which again, this is more of a difficult one, right? Because there's really is not a good trend that's taking place in here. So, I think being patient with this group a bit, maybe it kind of stalled at that 200-day moving average, but let's see if it can kind of build. And, it may not be a leader, right away, but if it kind of continues to build, maybe on a longer term basis, that's the biotech group can work. Home builder, not home builder, sorry. Like I said, it's been a long week. I'm going to make a few mistakes in this video because there's been so much information, and every day has been a busy day. But I've liked how the medical devices, and if you're a regular viewer of my video, you know that I've been talking about the medical devices. This is another area has not had just one name that's participated, but actually a group of them, have done pretty well, right? ISRG being the leader. Medtronic has kind of come up really nicely over the last week or so. But look at ISRG, right? Just a little bit of digestion here after the earnings kind of came in and checked into the gap, the earnings gap, and it got bought up. So I think that's pretty good. Here's what the MDT chart looks like as well. All right, so do we want to? I want to keep this video short. I wanted to cover some of the major themes. I think as well, like if you look at the consumer staples, right? I know a lot of people don't want to own defensive stocks, but if you go through, and it's similar to the other groups that we talked about, you look at like a Hershey, Mondelez went up today. Procter and Gamble did pretty well, right? So you go through these names, and the beverages are doing very well. Like I think Pepsi made a new high today. So, there's nothing wrong with being in something that's trending like this, right? Coca-Cola had good earnings as well, right? Not a bad looking chart. I mentioned Hershey, right? Look at this Hershey chart. Again, took a little while back in here to finally break out, but, some of these names, right? So, the way that I'm going to end this video for the day is, there are some very interesting areas that are breaking out, right? That are not in, that are in a bull market, right? But it's certainly not every group, right? If we look at the underperformers for the month as well, there's a considerable amount that were down, over 3% for the month, right? Even the FANG stocks were down 3.8. Sorry, it's not the FANG stocks, it's the internet ETF. right? So there's things like Pinterest and Snap that went down, right? Steel names were down 4.5%. For the month. The semis did not have not a horrible month, down 6%, right? So it doesn't mean, how you label things, bull market, bear market, which I hate to do that. But just because if you mention like, oh, something's in a bull market, you still can't be complacent, right? Because down 6% is a horrible performance for the month for the semiconductors. The solar group was down 7%, right? And the Chinese internet names were down 10%. Clean energy stocks down 12%. So it's important to cover both the good and the bad, because this market is not a everything goes up market, right? There are some areas that are in bull markets and some that remain in bear markets, right? So this will be very interesting as we progress towards Wednesday's Fed meeting, right? And see if we get some type of clarification from Mr. Powell, right? And that could kind of give us some direction for the month, right? And it's nice because we get that meeting out of the way in the beginning of the month. All right, guys, that is it. Have a great weekend and hope to see you in the trading room on Monday morning. As always, for members, we put out weekend notes, so that will take place as well this weekend.